Hey friends, welcome to this event tonight. A conversation with Adrienne Belafonte Biesemeyer. I am so excited and so glad that you're here. We're going to bring them on here, bring her on in just a moment. Um, and Gosh, it's so cool. I'm going to introduce Krista Jett in just a minute, who's going to share how Krista helped make this happen. She is our Kevin Bacon for Adrienne and is going to talk about is going to introduce Adrienne and talk about her connection with Adrienne. But it's so good to have you all here for this conversation, this important conversation on race, privilege, and our place in the world with Adrienne Belafonte Biesemeyer, who you will love. I'm so excited for you to meet her. A couple things. If you don't have pen and paper, or if you're driving, as it looks like Catherine is, that's okay. But get some paper and a pen if you have it. Adrienne is going to offer somewhat of a questionnaire, a quiz to begin our time together, and so have that handy. Also, bring an open and curious mind, willing to learn new things and think together. Lean into the discomfort, embrace the awkward, as we say here at the local church. Just be here with that spirit, a curious and willing to learn spirit, open spirit. It's so good to have you here. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Brent, and I serve as the pastor of the local church. I know we have a few folks who have been invited from other places, and it's good to have you here. A couple other things for housekeeping. On the side of the window, or if you're on your phone, somewhere on your phone, there's a place to chat. You are welcome to put your insights there, something you're learning. But I find when I'm, in Zooms and things like that, is like anytime somebody says something that's interesting, I will type it into the chat, not only to let other people know, that I'm paying attention, but also it reinforces what I'm learning for myself. And so feel free to do that tonight as well. And you should also see a spot to ask a question. And we would invite you, there will be a Q&A time. And so if you have a question, put it there. You can put it in the chat too, and I'll do my best to monitor it, but ask a question sort of keeps it all together on this Crowdcast platform. So if you have any other questions, let me know. But it's good to have you here. At the local church, we take the work of anti-racism seriously. This work began for us really at our baptism, but it became much more pronounced for us last year in the wake of the George Floyd murder. We had an intern last summer, Zari Wilson, who helped us create an anti-racism task force. And the task force and the team is committed to the work of dismantling racism. And the team recently is in the process of launching a monthly rhythm for that work that it leans into the framework that Jamar Tisby in his book, How to Fight Racism, that he offers, which is awareness, relationships, and commitment. He calls it the ARC framework, the ARC method: awareness, relationships, and commitment. And every month, as part of our anti-racist work, the local church is going to lean into one of those categories, one of those pieces of the framework: awareness, relationships, and commitment. For May, we are focusing on relationships, which is why it is so great that it is through a relationship that Krista Jett knows Adrienne Belafonte Biesemeyer. It is through a relationship that we are able to step into this learning tonight. And it is through this learning that we will be enabled and empowered by God's grace to become more rooted in relationships ourselves. The tools, the thinking, the knowledge that we will explore tonight will enable us to be better at relationships with all of God's beloved. And so that's in part why we have invited Adrienne here tonight, and she has been so gracious to say yes. So without further ado, I want to invite Krista Jett on the screen to share a little bit more about Adrienne and introduce her. Hi, Krista.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. It's my honor to introduce our special presenter, Adrienne Belafonte Biesemeyer. Adrienne Belafonte Biesemeyer is the oldest child of singer, actor, political, and social activist Harry Belafonte. Adrienne is a retired master's level licensed professional counselor and former chair of the West Virginia Board of Examiners of Counseling. She has had her own private practice working with pediatric clients in Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia, and has been a student counselor and education specialist at the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. And at the Osteopathic Medical School, she also designed and directed the Center for International Medicine and Cultural Concerns, which focused on creating opportunities for medical students to learn about and experience medical training in developing countries around the world. She is an avid traveler, but she has been a resident of West Virginia since 1967. And she and her husband, David, still reside in the Greenbrier Valley of West Virginia, where I grew up. And they have two grown children, Rachel Blue and Brian, with whom I went to school. Rachel and I played saxophone in high school jazz band together, and we've got lots of happy memories. She and Rachel have also founded the ANEER Experience back in 1997, and the ANEER Foundation and ANEER Experience is a nonprofit focusing on educating North Americans about non-European based cultures and volunteer opportunities in underserved communities, especially in Africa. They create volunteer opportunities to social change and in underserved communities. But to me, she has been a role model and a teacher since I was a teenager, bringing multicultural appreciation to the small towns of the Greenbrier. She was the director of the dance ensemble with which my sisters danced and loved so much. She was the choreographer who worked with our color guard in the high school band. She was the chaperone who led overly excited teenagers through guided meditations to get us to fall asleep on the hard gym floors during band trips, long before guided meditation was trendy. And of course, mom to Rachel and Brian. So Adrienne, I can't thank you enough for joining and sharing so generously your time, your expertise, and your personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krista and Brent. It really is exciting what you're doing and what the local church has embraced. And so when Krista reached out for me and told me what was going on, I said, for sure. How could I possibly say no? Couldn't say no to her anyway, but no, what you're doing, I think, needs all the support and love and energy, because it is a very difficult task. I do have to say one thing. I do have two grandchildren, but Rachel and Brian are my children, and Brian's the father of the two grandchildren. So even though I have gray hair, I'm not quite that ancient to be Krista's grandmother, but but I do thank you, Krista, very much for your love and inviting me here. And so let's get started. I do have a PowerPoint, but it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I promise. It's just a short piece, and it's to help us look at ourselves. So this is an interactive assignment. No one has to comment who doesn't want to. It's more for you to think about yourself in regards to your upbringing and your experiences. In addition, if somebody's with you in this circle, if you are up to sharing with them, and I'm hoping to open conversation. So at the very end, I forgot to send the book list, but I have a book list, and I have some videos that I'll send to Brent, and he can share with anyone who wants to go beyond this meeting. And I will also be open at, when we get through the little quiz section and the personal reflection section, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I know that people have questions about my father and his social activism. And I know some of you did see the documentary on his life. If you haven't, it's called Sing Your Song. And you can find it on any number of things like Amazon. I don't think Netflix has it, but some other places do. Brent can share that with you because I know he had it as a presentation, for the local church, I think last week or so. So feel free to jot down whatever questions you have, and Brent will ask them. And the only reason why I'm not reading them is because you see these? Okay. Well, they're not thick, but my iPad is so far away, I can't read the small print. So I wouldn't be able to read your questions anyway. So let's start. Now let's have the first slide, Brent. And what I want you to do on that.
It'll take me just a second to get it up here.
That's fine. They can be doing the assignment while you're getting it up there. The first thing I want you to do is list 10 friends. These are 10 people that you spend time with, or that you wish you had more time to spend with them, because I know that that's been hard through COVID. But the friends you feel closest to, or the friends that you really enjoy. And if you only have 5 of those, then that's fine. Put those 5 though. And if you only have 1, that's fine too. I do hope you have some, because if you don't, then that's a whole nother discussion. But in the meantime, let's take just a moment for you to list 10 friends. And if you have a couple of more than that, that's fine too. But I want you to truly think about, while I'm sort of talking, I don't have background music for you to do it. Who are these people? And don't think too hard on it. It's just truly, who would you like to have at a party with you? Even if you wouldn't have 2 of the same people at the same party, who are those people that you enjoy spending time with? Okay, so if we go to the next slide, Brent. All right, now what I'd like you to do, you don't have to write down everything that's there, but read it and just put A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. I want you to look at what you believe, not what other people have said, but what's in your heart. African Americans are genetically predisposed to be good at art, basketball, dancing, football, house cleaning, math, music, science. Which ones do you think are that African Americans are genetically predisposed to? All right, followed by the exact same question, but in regards to people who have European ancestry. So are people who have European ancestry, and I mean classically what we call in this country white people, are they genetically predisposed to art, basketball, dancing, football, house cleaning, math, music, science? All right, let's go to the next slide, Brent. All right. So the first question was, are African Americans genetically predisposed to be good at that list? There is no real science that supports that African Americans are predisposed to basketball, football, dancing, things that are generally stereotypical references. It's mostly environmental. When you have, when you live in an underserved community, playing basketball games, that's an easy setup. And even if it's just, tossing a ball into a garbage can. So you develop skills. And within these, Black Americans were encouraged to go that direction in school, in communities. And so if any of you did put down that there's a genetic base for this, it's more a cultural base. We do have survival of the fittest, and so through culture, there is scientific evidence that genetics can change. I mean, people bring up the question of like African athletes who are really good at sprinting. But once again, they don't drive cars, and that's way too broad. But within their life, they do a lot of walking and a lot of running. And so culturally, again, you get into, yes, these athletes are good at that, but that's conditioning, not genetics. Then we get down to science. And the problem with African American and other students of color not succeeding in math and science has to do, again, with environment. It is classic that, and a lot of social studies on African American children not being called on or encouraged to follow any of these subject matters. But there's plenty of evidence out there of people who are successful at this. So Neil deGrasse Tyson took Carl Sagan's place. And he is the director of the Museum of Science and Astronomy in New York City, which is where Carl Sagan had been before. May Carol Jimson, she is an astronaut. And then we have a movie I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. It's heartwarming and opens up our eyes. It's called Hidden Figures. And Katherine Johnson, who was a West Virginian, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have had our first circumventing of the Earth. Our space program would have been behind the Russians if it wasn't for these three African American women. Likewise, people go, well, all basketball players are Black. Again, it has to do with opportunity and the excelling in these areas. But some of you may be old enough to remember Larry Bird and Jerry West, Jerry West is a West Virginian. I'm not an avid basketball player fan, so I know there's got to be others out there, but you can do your research, do your Googling. And then, of course, in football, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, and we can get into the discussion about them being quarterbacks and that whole thing. But I think you get the idea of where I'm coming from with this subject matter. So realizing the difference between a genetic science behind something versus an opportunity to excel at something. Okay, Brent, let's have the next slide, please. All right, so with that, if you could take a moment and jot down 3 stereotypes that that you have had or that people within your circle have had about African American men? And while you're at it, 3 stereotypes about white men. Or I guess if I use African American, I should use European descent. I could sing for you while you're doing this, but that would bring up a whole lot of other questions. Yes, I am Harry Belafonte's daughter, but I can't sing. And you'd think genetics would be involved in that.
I do have questions about that.
I'll answer that later, Brent. All right, so the next question is, what do you think is the population that has the highest drug abuse? What percent of the population is African American? What percent of the population is classified as white? What percent of the population, what percent of the US prison population is African American? And are African Americans more likely to be imprisoned for violent crimes, non-violent crimes, illegal drug use, domestic disputes? I'll give you a few minutes to answer those. And they're up on the screen. Okay, Brent, let's go to the next screen. Brent, if you can hear me, we need the next screen. I don't see you up here anymore. Okay.
It looks to me like this. Can you see it now?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. That's right. That's
Okay.
correct. I happened to highlight on mine, and I guess I didn't send you that copy. Apologize, everyone. All right, so let's start at the top. I want you to think about whether your choice of stereotypes were negative or positive for African American men. How many of the stereotypes that you came up with were negative, and how many of them were positive? Likewise, for your list about European descent men, how many in your list were positive and how many were negative? When we ask these questions among mixed groups, gender mixed groups, usually the females come out with more negatives in both areas than they do positive. And that's another discussion, the Me Too movement and the experience that women have had in the past and where women are going now. So I do recognize that. And as I said, that's something for further discussion, either at the end of this when you have open questions or another presentation. All right, so what population has the highest drug abuse? 4.8% of Asian Americans, 6.9% of Black Americans, 7.1% Hispanics or Latinos, 7.7% of whites, and 9.3% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, and 10.1% Native American and Alaskan Natives. This is something I'd like for you all to Google. First of all, to fact check the numbers that I have here, but also to question yourself, why are these numbers so different? What's interesting is the closeness around drug abuse. If you note, you probably thought African Americans had the highest. I'm just guessing. That doesn't mean everyone or that I'm right about the whole group. But in other studies, the majority of people view that Black Americans have the highest drug abuse. But yet it turns out that whites have a higher percent of drug abuse. When you look at the population, however, what percent of the US population is Black American? It's only 13.4%, which I'm sure is also a surprise number to a lot of people, because it does seem like there's a whole lot of us out there, doesn't it? Yet the population that's classified white in America is 60.1%. There's a big jump between 13.4 and 60.1. Yet, the prison population is 33% African American. We make up 13% of the general population, but then 33% of the prison population. And what are African Americans more likely to be imprisoned for? All of the above. Let's go to the next slide. So, of the 225,240 people who were serving time in state prisons, we're not talking federal, state prisons for drug offenses in 2011, Blacks made up 45% and whites comprised 30%. But once again, think about the size of the overall population, general population. Whites account for about 30% of the US prison population, but they're 60% of the general population. Hispanics account for 23% of inmates, but they only make up 16% of the general population. And then African Americans, 33%, the largest percent of the prison population, but they're only 13% of the general population. And according to the University of Michigan, African American prisoners who were convicted of murder were about 50% more likely to be innocent, but sent to prison because of assumptions or mishandling of police information and the courts. Next slide, please. Okay. So I want you to go back to your friends list. And I want you to look at your list and put down what's their ethnicity, what's their race. And I want to clarify something here about race. The term race used to distinguish between physical appearances did not come into being until the 17th, really the 18th century. Race was used, but it was used just as a general classifier, but it wasn't used because of your skin color. It could be a cultural group. It could actually be, they talked about in, the early centuries, a race of cardinals, not meaning the bird, but meaning the Catholic Church. But then when colonialism started in the 17th century, white Christians had to justify how they could eliminate a native population, how they could disregard, disrespect, and enslave different people. So they had to make them lesser than, be inferior to. So the term racist and racism developed in the 17th century and was strictly based on the need to have someone less than you so that you could justify the economics of destroying a people or enslaving a people. And I know there will be questions about that, and we can talk about that in a minute. So but race as it's just defined today in our culture. So what are your friends' ethnicity? These are your close friends. What are their age ranges? Are they in your age group or are they younger or older? What's their gender? What's their education background? And if you don't know, make an assumption. What is their religion? What's their marital status? What's their sexual orientation? And last, what's the first language? What's the language that they speak in their household or that they grew up with? So let's go to the next slide. And while you're writing this down, I did this glaring light because I do want you to close your eyes and just take a moment to ponder, one, everything that we've talked about, but most importantly, who's in your social group? Is your social group diverse on any level? Age-wise? Definitely the question we have this evening is, is there a mix of races and culture within your friends group? Or is your friends group pretty much the same as you are? Now, I've addressed this presentation, believing that I have a predominantly white audience, but these same questions go out to people of all cultures. Look at yourself and look at the people that you surround yourself with and ask the question to yourself, why is that? Why are you more comfortable with a particular group of people than you would be with others? And it's very easy to say, well, I happen to live in this neighborhood and, and the people I work with, they're all whatever I am. And so it's just more convenient. Then the question goes further. Why are you living in that neighborhood? Why is your business not more diverse? Or if you work in a place that is very diverse, how come you're friends with certain people and not with others? And we're not looking just at personality. Not everybody can get along with everybody. Not everybody likes everybody. But take a personal moment and just think, Why am I where I am? And what are my thoughts on this subject matter? Okay, Brent, you can make me full screen and the PowerPoint's over. And there we go. So with the questions that I've just asked you, if Brent, if anyone has brought anything up that they'd like me to address, I'm more than happy to do that. Likewise, I'm more than happy to answer questions in regards to my own environment and upbringing. I'll give you a little background about me. I live in Southern West Virginia, and my family, we were raised in New York City and upstate Massachusetts and New York. So my family found it very strange that I moved to West Virginia. But I went to a private school that was predominantly, it was integrated, but predominantly white, very liberal, incredibly liberal. It was very political. They turned out well-read students and well-informed students, although my husband does point out, but none of us learned how to spell. And so thank goodness for spell check. My life experience sent me to West Virginia. I had an uncle on my mother's side who taught at West Virginia State, and my parents and I agreed with them, felt I needed a Black experience. And so West Virginia State College, which is now West Virginia State University, is a historically Black college, Black university. And so I went there to have that experience. The experience I got was really interesting in the fact that from 4 o'clock in the evening until 8 o'clock in the morning, the campus was 98% African American. All the residents in the school were African American. But come 8:30 in the morning, the start of the first class, until 4:30 in the afternoon, the campus was predominantly white because it was a commuter college also. And so all of the white students came in, went to class, and then left campus. So that in itself really gave me some insight into what was and what is going on in the world. But it was a heartfelt and a challenge experience for me too. My husband is white. I met him on campus, although he was taking an art class and was not a resident of the campus. He had already graduated from Wisconsin Law School, and he was a social activist. And so that's how I became interested in him and the things that he was doing. But in short, every little piece of our upbringing has influences on how we think and how we feel. So Brent, I'll go to you to start feeding to me the questions that people might have. Okay, I can't.
Yeah, great. Can you hear
Yes.
me now? All right. Katie asks this question: when someone finds themselves in a homogenous group after doing this exercise, what is your advice to them?
Well, one, be very aware of that. And within that, question yourself as to why are you in this group in particular? Why is this group exclusive? And I know it is uncomfortable for people to say, okay, well, now we're going to start inviting every person of color, Hispanic, Asian, African American. We want to integrate. We want to be, we want to be with this. And I know your heart of hearts are there, but that's a difficult task. So question yourself as to why you want to do it. Do you want to do it because you really want to learn more and you want to be inclusive? Or is it a case of feeling guilty? And I'd like you to get rid of the guilty part and change it over to a learning experience. See what you can do. I mean, right now, obviously the local church is doing its best. So maybe as a church group, you could start by having a relationship with other churches that have other cultures behind them, other religions, but that there's an intersect, not that you have to agree on the theology, but rather you agree that on the humanity. So start by having a small group dinner. Start by doing a soup kitchen on, Saturdays or Wednesdays for the homeless, but do it with a church different from yours, or a community group that's different from yours, and so that with differences you also learn. So if you as the local church are going to an African American community or an Asian community, first learn something about the culture and let the people know you're there not because you feel sorry for them, but because you want to learn and have your horizons broaden. I hope that answered. If not, tell her to ask me the same thing again and I'll come up with more.
In the comments, she says, "Love the idea that we can agree on the humanity. Love wins." Amen. I have a question, and then Katie posted another one. But I think, knowing you and some of our preliminary conversation, this question will lead into the next question. But oftentimes when we're talking to people and we just mention the phrase white privilege or white supremacy, walls will immediately go up. And I think a lot of that has to do with people feeling guilty about it, as you just named. But I wonder, in your estimation, what is that about? I think it makes it so difficult to continue a conversation, so difficult to cultivate relationship when a wall goes up immediately just at the mention of a phrase. And so what's that about, and how do we get around it, or if not around it, then through it?
Well, one thing is having an understanding within yourself, and then it really is hard to open conversations, even with like people, sometimes like-minded people. So the clarification in regards to white privilege, when you hear the word privilege, everybody immediately thinks it has to do with economics. And people will talk about, my family worked hard. My family was not wealthy. My family were also sharecroppers, or my family, worked in the factories. And so they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. How can you say that I have privilege? It has absolutely nothing to do with income. It has to do with presentation. So if you walked into an Eddie Bauer, were you ever followed around the store just because you were walking around it? Did the floor or the salesperson, just sort of keep an eye on you because they were suspicious that you might be shoplifting? Or what's been in the news is, have you ever returned something without a receipt and been accused of shoplifting it? Whereas there are a number of cases of African American young men with the receipt in hand coming in to return a sweater, and Eddie Bauer is a store in particular, but it's been other stores as well, and were accused of shoplifting, even though they had their receipt with them. And it had to become, broad, newswise and newsworthy, or legal action had to be taken either against the institution, or legal action was taken against the supposed perpetrator. So just by having white skin, and I know that people have said, well, let's talk about the Holocaust and the Jewish situation. If you take away a last name, if you're just an individual walking into certain situations, note how people are responding to you. And so white privilege is that you can do things that persons of color or Asians, because of their facial looks, can't do or are not allowed, because people are suspicious of them. So that's where the privilege part comes, just simply by being. It is a very difficult conversation. And I know people go, I'm not racist, because racist is a very painful word for people to come on. What my response to that is that you don't mean to be, but there are certain things when you're brought up that are just encoded. Have you ever laughed at a racial joke or a cultural joke? Have you ever told one? Even though, people respond, oh, that's just a joke. If we seriously study jokes and comedy, it's always at somebody else's expense. Human nature is, you're less than me, so I can make fun of you. So the point now is to really look at situations that you are in, but that whole thing about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, what happens with them? For years, we, as African-American communities, it was, if your African-American child is stopped by the police, what you want them to do is put their hands up on the steering wheel, be sure to have the dome light on. If they have time to get their phone going, turn the phone on to record the conversation. When the officer comes up to you and says, I want your license and registration, you say, okay, you want me to give you my license and registration. They're in my glove box. Do I have your permission to go into my glove box? And if you have a permit to carry and you have a gun in your glove box, you be sure to tell the policeman, I want you to know there is a gun in that glove box. Do you want someone else to take it out? You're having this kind of conversation. How many white parents have that kind of conversation with their young Black children, or within themselves? How many people panic when the police blue light is behind you? And if you do panic because you were speeding, or that you have liquor in the front seat or something like that, it's a totally different panic from the African American who is now in fear of their life. And two of the latest car incidents, the driver did have their hands up on the steering wheel. The young soldier who was maced by the police in Norfolk, Virginia, he had his hands on the steering wheel, and that made no difference. So that's where we're coming from, that headset. For people who claim they're not prejudiced, I have to say that prejudice is degrees. But stop and think about what degree, where are you? You're not without prejudice because the society does not allow you that. And carrying it further with the white population, it goes into racism. We all are prejudiced against something or someone for whatever reasons in our life theory, but the racism part, and racism is purely defined as being a white issue because it was defined by the early white colonists and colonists, but also the scientists who also wanted to prove that there was a difference between races. So that's where we get the distinction. Now, what do you do about it? Sure, it hurts, and it is something that you don't want to think about. But what I'm requesting is that you do think about it, and how do you get around it? Talking to other people and getting their opinions. Okay, Brent?
Next question comes from Adam, who asks, are there other phrases we should be cognizant of when media or commentators use phrases like riots instead of protests or suspect instead of alleged?
What's interesting is, and seeing you've asked that question, you've probably noticed that I've seen a slight, but just slight change. But one of the criticisms of news media was when they would put an African-American suspect picture on the screen, that they were blacker than they might actually be. Newsweek years ago was accused of that they had, and I think actually it was the O.J. Simpson trial that he was portrayed as much darker than he was. For a long time, newscasters would go, the suspect is an African-American, 6 feet tall, blah, blah, blah. But whenever there was a white suspect, they never said the suspect is white. But they would say Hispanic, Asian, African-American, Black. And it is truly in tuning yourself. What do you see? On I think a more fun note, a few years ago, and the first commercial I remember was a Target commercial. My husband and I sit and watch commercials. And now that you have the ability to go back and see that again, I'd go, was that a biracial couple? And then we'd go back and we'd see that, yes, it was a clearly young African-American woman, but very attractive because she was about my complexion or lighter, usually a little lighter. And she had curly, permed kind of hair, but she's in bed with a clearly white guy, and they're looking at a pregnancy test. That was not the Target ad. That's another ad. But the Target ad was, it was that montage that they do at Christmas time. And then you saw there was two young men, and these two African-American children were crawling all over them like they were relatives or adoptive parents. And now you have, you suspect gay couples. There was a dinner commercial, and one woman put her hand on the other woman, and the one that I loved it's a cereal commercial, and it's an old white man and an old Black woman. And my husband and I would go, that's us. And yes, we like Kellogg's Corn Flakes or whatever they were advertising. So looking at advertisements and how they portray people. And since George Floyd, we've noticed that there's very few pure white advertisements anymore. They generally toss in at least one African-American and one Asian and one you're not quite sure what they are. So if Madison Avenue, who determines what sells, has gotten on board with, yeah, money's green. It doesn't matter what color the person holding it is, but it sells. So the observation that you have made is excellent. And so I just encourage you to make more observations and make note of, why did they present the news that way? Or, oh, that commercial was fun. And did you notice? Start counting how many persons who aren't white that you see in commercials. Next one.
Well, that reminds me too. I remember when Michael Brown was murdered, there was a, the news would cover, the murder, but then dig up things about his life to almost validate seemingly his death. And so yeah, we see that also. We have to be cognizant of that in the media.
Yeah, well, also the defense wanted to, but the prosecution did an excellent job in regards to the Chauvin case. They wanted to say that George Floyd was a substance abuser and not a good guy, and he had counterfeit money, and they were, trying to dehumanize him or make him a lesser human.
So two questions here. First one from Katie, and the second one from Kelly. The first one is, in your experience, what is a major challenge in the pursuit of equity right now? in your experience, what is a major challenge in the pursuit of equity? And the second
Wow.
question is about your family. So we'll answer this one first, and then, and she doesn't want the biggest challenge, just a major challenge. That's
Well, there really are so many. And my daughter, who is lighter skinned than I am, she has my face and my physical, but closer to her father, well, between our skin tones. But what she said was, when people go, "Oh, can't believe we're still here," or I can't believe this is happening all over again. And from her generation, which is the same as Krista's, there are a lot of challenges, and it's ongoing, and that we go through phases, and that just when we think we've seen the mountaintop, quoting Dr. King, that we've reached it, then something happens, like the Trump administration opens Pandora's box, and if you know the story of Pandora, she's not getting back in. So it's, yeah, you can become overwhelmed with where do we start? Where, there's the whole thing about culture canceling. If we take down Confederate statues, are we working towards canceling white history in order to bring up Black history? I think one place that I would start and had hoped to start in regards to education is people learning about other people. It's not that you have to embrace Buddhism, but it'd be nice if you knew something about it and where they're coming from. Education in regards to why is Black history 1 month? And as a Black comedian said once, well, they gave us a month, Dick Gregory, they gave us a month, but it's the shortest month of the year. Why was February chosen and not January or March? Why is Martin Luther King Day a holiday in which schools close and everybody can go to the mall, as opposed to the schools teaching about Dr. King's ethics and his desires? So I think the biggest challenge is teaching each other, and then learning. What do I want to learn? What do I want to know? Let me not run away from this uncomfortable feeling. Let me address it. When we do mindfulness exercises, and we say, let's go to the discomfort. And instead of denying it, let's address it. What would make me feel better? Denying it and carrying guilt is not going to fix it. Addressing it will fix it. And finding, small steps. I'm not saying you have to jump in and, do all the mea culpas and things like that, but start questioning yourself and start questioning the people around you.
question. Were you able to get to know your father's mother? And if yes, what did you learn from her?
She obviously saw the movie. Yes, I did. We called her Mimi, and she was very Jamaican. That's a classification in that she cooked great food, and she was very family focused when I was growing up, because I'm 5 years ahead of the next child, my sister Sherry, who people may know from, because she's in the business. And so with my grandmother Mimi, my father's mother, my Nana, who was on my mother's side, and my Aunt Shirley, who's also only 5 years older than I am, but calls me her baby. Right there was, and we lived in Harlem, 156th Street, I believe it was. And so within that community, there was a foundation of family, the importance of family, being loyal to family, and really good food. I used to be a dancer, but you can see now that I've gone to the family side of really good food. She unfortunately had mental illness that came out years later, once I had gone off to high school. And at one point, we didn't know where she was. And although my father had bought a house for her in California so that she could get out of Harlem and be there, and she and her second husband and my Aunt Shirley and some uncles who were younger lived there. But then she wanted to go back to Jamaica, and she did for a while, and then she came back to the US without letting my father or his siblings know about it. And she chose, I hate to say that because we all think, is that really a choice? But she was a homeless person. And but all of her children did their best to, when they would catch up with her, could find her, put her in a comfortable, what we considered a comfortable situation, but she would wander off.
I wanna ask one more question about your dad, your family growing up, and then it's 8:04. I want to honor your time, everyone's time. So maybe
Well,
one more question after that,
I'll
or-
give you a few more questions, and I'll tell you when I'm done. I know I
Okay,
talk
great.
a lot.
Perfect. You let me know. I love it. Um, I remember, we had a preliminary conversation, and my mind was blown when you talked about growing up and having Langston Hughes in your living room and James Baldwin come over as well. How did just being in the presence of those figures, how did that inform you? How did that inspire you, or not? Or was it just your dad, your life, your education? What did that have an impact on who you are, who you have become?
Yes, as an adult, I'd say 20s, 30s, and now when you realize who those people were and the experiences in the past, it makes me appreciate more the conversations I had. And did it impact me at the moment? No. One of my most embarrassing but favorite stories about me is I think I'm about 13, 14 years old. No, I must have been about 13. And I'm sitting in a limousine with Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, Andy Young, my dad, and I'm sitting between my stepmother and Jesse Jackson's wife. And I'm sitting there, and now, mind you, they're having a caucus because they're getting ready to go in to meet with the Congressional Black Caucus. And if they had had, iPhones and iPads and all those things at that time, I probably would have been the kid sitting in the middle, with my thumbs going rapidly. Because when you're, 12, 13, 14, sometimes it's hard for some, and I think the majority, to grasp what's going on, because I wasn't included in the conversation. And there are parents who have, who insist that their children be included in the conversation. I was a witness to these things. And then reflecting back, there's so much I wish I had paid more attention to. But being with those people definitely had an influence on my outlook when I got to college, and racial issues going on there. Knowing that I had been in the presence of these people has given me, or had given me, a certain level of strength and confidence that I could carry their torch on. I could be someone that I would hope they would be proud of and want to include me definitely as an adult in the conversation.
I love that idea of just being around them gave you the confidence, gave you the spirit, the boldness to carry that mantle. I pray that this here tonight will do that for us, you know. So being with you. So
Awesome.
another question about your dad, if that's okay.
Yes.
How's he doing? And have you been able to visit during the pandemic? That's from Susan.
First, no, I've not been able to visit during the pandemic because he lives in New York City, and New York was really very strict in regards. And my dad's wife, Pam, who is just a wonderful human being, and people go, "Why do you refer to her as his wife?" My stepmother is still alive and was my stepmother for almost 50 years. So Julie has, and she was, for those who saw the film, my dad does talk about Julie and their relationship and having grown apart. But Pam is a remarkable woman and takes good care of him. He's now blind, hard of hearing. He can hear. And he just recently became blind, I'd say in the last 6 to 8 months. But his spirits are very high. He's sharp as a tack. He still has opinions, which he shares with his followers and his children in hopes that we're still listening and will carry his message forward. He is a remarkable human being. At the opening of the documentary, I had a woman come up to me afterwards and say, "I just want to thank you and your siblings for allowing us to have your father." And I told her she was most welcome, because he was always on the road. He was always in the midst of a struggle. But I feel that what he was doing was for me. So was he the classic come home at 5 o'clock and get up and go to work, 7 o'clock the next morning? No, in no way, shape, or form. But when he did interact with us, he was focused on us, and we did family trips, usually to a different country. And my fondest memory is, so he took all of us, and I was, I must have been, this time I think I was 14, 15, to Guinea, Africa, West Africa. He was asked to be the artistic director of the first African ballet, and ballet being generic for dance. So it was the first African dance troupe to come to the United States. And I was old enough within the family to travel with him and my stepmother to all the villages to watch the indigenous people dance their local tribal dances and to select dancers. I didn't get to select dancers, but I did get to see them within the environment. And my dad, so having those kinds of experiences with him are things that I know other children don't get. And those were very special. So even though he wasn't, as I said, 5 o'clock in the evening until 9 o'clock in the morning, he was working for humanity. He was working for everyone, and included us in his process as much as he felt he could. I've all my life I had people go, "Well, what's it like to have Harry Belafonte as a father?" And I always say, "Well, what did your dad do?" And in Krista didn't ask me this question, but with her father being a dentist, if they said a dentist, I'd say, "Okay, well, does your dad work on your teeth too? What's it like being married? I mean, having a dentist for a father? Is he always checking your mouth? Is he always?" Because Harry Belafonte is a persona for sure, but he's my father. So my and my siblings' relationship with him are child parent and not, I don't think, influenced by his celebrityness than any more so with any other child.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so where?
I got one more question
Go
here.
ahead.
Well, two more.
Okay, we'll take these two, and then I'll let everybody go have dinner or go watch their favorite TV show.
Go watch the documentary. Go watch Sing
Yeah.
your song. Do you? Somebody's breaking in. They're tiny. Do you see
Oh, that's
signs?
fine. Give them attention.
I'm just hoping they're clothed. Do you see signs of hope in the last year or so with regards to changing mindsets? Are commercials with more people of color enough? Do we think there is hope for a new outlook on equity in the US? So signs of hope in the last year. Is there hope for a new outlook on equity?
I'm probably the most optimistic person, and I will say that under COVID and the last presidential regime we had, that my hopes were, I had to work hard, really hard, at being optimistic. But with young people that I meet today, and that's just about anybody younger than I am, but groups like yours, wanting to learn and wanting to make change. I definitely come from the Peace Corps headset of that there's a drop in the bucket. And as long as there are drops going into the positive and wanting to change bucket, yes, I'm hopeful. There are so many issues on the table. I mean, we now have we've always had environmental issues, but they are very serious. But along with that goes for sure the economics and how is everybody living? Poverty. There's poverty, large poverty among white communities, but we can't isolate. And so as long as we are looking to reach out and as an individual doing the best I can, because that's all you can do is the best that you can, and that you take on leadership roles or participate. Yes, it's great to make donations to organizations like Stacey Abrams, who's trying to, really fight against voter restriction and things like that. The NAACP, there's any Black Lives Matters, but don't use that. They do need your donations, but don't use that as a panacea for you. Don't let that be, oh, well, I wrote that check and therefore I've done my duty. No, as long as people are involved, even if it's just conversations within their community, if you can make your friends group change, and that's starting there, then yes, there's always hope. And truly, there's always hope if you have God. I often go, okay, I don't get this, but I guess you have a reason. But I think I told you and Krista, my favorite little parable is the one about, so the flood's coming and everybody's told to, get out, get to safety. And the sheriff knocks on everybody's door. And this man says, no, God's going to save me. And then the high waters come and they come on a boat to his door and say, get in the boat, we got to go. And he says, no, God's going to save me. And then he's, up on the roof and a helicopter comes by and drops the ladder and says, climb up, get up, you're going to drown. And he says, no, God's going to save me. And sure enough, he drowns. And when he gets to the pearly gates, God's reply is, I gave you 3 chances. So I always use that one, and I'm sure people have heard it, because we're being given a lot of chances, but if we don't take them, we're doomed. But I see all these chances and I want people to take them. And, yes, I'm optimistic, but only as much energy as we put in. And my other little piece is, everybody talks about, we've got to save the planet. We've got to save the planet. No, planet is fine. The planet has been through more volatile history than any of us. And we're just a spot, not even a spot on the timeline. And, I don't think we've been here as long as the dinosaurs were. What we need to worry about is humanity. We are destroying ourselves environmentally and headset socially. And God's giving us the strength and the power to do it. But if we want to ignore that and we want to fight with each other or just throw away all that garbage, then I think God says, well, I'm giving you the chance. It's yours to do with it what you will. And so there you go. Unless there's a crushing question,
right.
I think I've out-talked your group.
Oh, we got one
Okay.
more. And I want to, Brooke says movement is hope in the comments. Amen. And Catherine says, thank you. I'm just catching up on the comments here. The last question for tonight then, what are you reading right now? And what do you recommend? What are you reading right now? And what do you recommend?
Well, I just finished, which we had talked about, White Fragility. And then I'm reading Water Dancer, written by, let me look. I really apologize. I'm terrible on the authors' names. Love the books, but in short, I do 3 kinds of reading. I do.
Is Water Dancer Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Thank you. Robin DiAngelo is White Fragility, and her book is bringing up a lot of controversial conversations. I do recommend that everybody, white and black, read White Fragility. Skip the introduction, her worst enemy, and her prologue. Read those at the end. Read those after you've read the bulk of her book, because I think she sets herself up within the book for almost failure with her audience. And there's a lot of criticism going on about her. And we can have a book discussion, maybe later in the summer if you want, on that particular book, because there's comments from both whites and blacks that are negative about the book. But in my opinion, I think they're missing the point that she wants to make in the book with that one. I love Water Dancer, the writing style of Coates. And it is a novel, but it goes into African-American belief systems. And I'm finding it delightful and intriguing and fascinating. And I will be happy to send you a reading list that I suggest on all kinds of subjects. And the New York Times, and so.
Yeah, please do. Please send us a list so that we can share that and get inside your head.
But I
We'd
still
love
want
to
to say Hidden Figures. If you want a feel good after this conversation, go watch Hidden Figures.
It's so good. So good. Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Can I offer a prayer for you before we leave?
Please.
All right.
Please.
Friends, would you pray with me? Gracious God, I give you thanks for the mind, the heart, the soul of your beloved Adrienne, for the ways that she has invited us into this conversation tonight, challenged us, helped us to grow, and to lean more into relationship with you and with one another. God, I give you thanks for the life that she has lived, the experiences that have shaped her and formed her, that have helped her become the amazing person that she is, the gracious person that she is. It is all such a gift of you, as she has helped us to see tonight. We pray, oh God, that this time together may embolden us and empower us and equip us by your grace. This time spent, that it would all empower us to go into this world and to be agents of your reconciliation, agents of your mending, partners with you in the work that you will have us do for the restoration and the reconciliation of all things. God, I give you thanks for this time, for each person here. Continue to work in us, oh God. And I pray blessing over all who are here, and for Adrienne as well. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is God with us. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And a blessing and a thank you to everyone who made it through listening to all of me. And feel free to let Brent, if you have any more questions, Brent, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to answer them in any way I can.
Thank you so much.
Have a
All right.
blessed evening. And again, thank you. And thank you, Krista. And talk to you all a little later. Good night.
Good night.